we were not copying Gremlins, although, as they say, great minds in Hollywood, the same projects happen all of a sudden. But this idea of a PG-13 quasi-horror movie that was as much humorous as it was scary was what attracted us to it.
Brian had written Critters before Gremlins, and I think it bothered him maybe just a little bit because of the comparisons, but how could he avoid it? Because of course Gremlins was the mega hit that made his script valuable, and that's what got it sold.
It was the right time. People were looking for that type of thing. And not a lot, as far as I know, not a lot changed from that initial draft. Anything small, they were getting made, and that was, I mean, Critters obviously was the best of all of those.
Not only because you had the great creatures themselves, but it was funny, and you had this terrific cast.
The other ones feel like a ripoff. This one is, you know, Critters is just something entirely different. From top to bottom, it's just kind of, you know, I mean, to me, as good as it gets. Brian wrote Critters when he was 19 years old on an old typewriter that's in my garage.
Well, I knew I was going to move down to LA right out of high school, and so I thought, let me have a script with me. So I sat down and I wrote this thing, Critters, and it sort of came from a number of different sources. I just liked the idea that aliens would also have criminals, you know. Aliens don't have to be human form, they can take any form. So I thought, okay, I'll have the critters be aliens, and they escape from a prison, and they come to Earth. And then I'm a huge Western fan, so I said, I'll have bounty hunters after them. And I just wrote this, you know, this script, and stuck it in my bag with me and came down to LA.
My brother, who came to live with me, he's 8 years younger than I am, and he's in the movie, he's in Critters. He went and started working for Roger Corman as a carpenter to make what little bit of a living you could make from Roger Corman. And there was a rumor that came down at New World Studios, Roger's place, that if someone could come up with an idea for a screenplay that could be shot on the sets that were already up, that Roger would maybe do the movie. And my brother and another carpenter wrote a script, and it became a movie called Android. And they asked me to co-produce with Rupert Harvey, who became my partner, and we went on to make several movies together.
I worked for Roger Corman for a while, worked in his mailroom, then his special effects, and I was a camera assistant. I did a bunch of stuff. Ended up in the editing department, and through that I met this editor, Steve Herrick. So Steve said, I don't suppose you've got a script laying around? And I said, you know, it just so happens I do. So I pulled my script of Critters out, and it was written in longhand on lined notebook paper, you know, and I gave it to Steve, and he read it and said, you know, this isn't too bad. You know, let me take a crack at this. So he did a draft of it. We got the script to the point where our plan was to go around to dentists and doctors and just get investors and go make it as a 16 millimeter movie.
He had storyboarded his own version of it. He had posters made for it that he painted because he was going to just go shoot this with his buddy.
My brother and Rupert and I and Aaron Lipstadt, who did Android, we formed our own company. And Critters, I think, was the first script that we got that we made and we sold to New Line.
One of our assistant editors was a man named Steve Herrick. He and another assistant editor, Brian Muir, brought us a script.
We showed it to him and said, look, we just want some advice. How would we go about raising money for this thing? And they read the script and said, you know, actually, we'd like to produce this. We could do something with this. And we were like, really? Like, we couldn't believe it, you know. And of course, they were independent producers, so they then would have to go raise money for it.
The first place we had it placed was with Roger. Roger was going to do it. He'd already agreed to do it. It was at a lower budget even than this low budget movie became. And there's several points in my life, and this is one of them, where a true Hollywood story happened. Rupert and I happened to meet Bob Shea at, I think, MeFed one year with Android. We were there with Android. He liked the movie, and he heard that we were working on something else, and he was from New York, so Bob Shea was staying at the Chateau Marmont, where he always stayed, and he said, come on over and talk to me about this movie. And you know, Rupert and I thought, we thought we were doing with Roger, but we came over and talked to him. And before we left the room, he said, I'll do this movie.
Radar control, this is prison transport 9961, requesting permission to land, over.
We've been expecting you, PT 9961. Please confirm payload, over.
Crite prisoners, 8 of them, over.
Originally, the script was much harder. I mean, it was definitely an R-rated movie, and it was much darker.
The kills and the things like that, he really wanted it to be a balance of humor, but real horror. Not everything was a lampoon, not everything was kind of a gentle send-up. It actually, they were vicious creatures from outer space.
Steve and I had originally a couple of the family members even die in the script. I can't exactly remember. I think the father dies. Once Rupert and Barry got involved, and they started saying, well, you know, really the family should survive and stay together. And I was like, no, that's ridiculous. We can't have that. Because I wanted this really hard, dark, you know, movie where you never knew who was going to be killed next, you know. And Steve was sort of the calming influence. Oh, Brian, you know, these guys might have a point.
It had the other element of the young person sort of saves the family. So it had that element that was great for PG-13 kids to come see with their parents, and everybody could enjoy it.
Stay here. If I need your help.
Brett, what's that thing gonna do with April?
It's gonna kill her.
Oh, it's gonna kill her. Kill her.
And we said, look, the one sort of caveat, we said, let Steve direct it, even though he directed a student film, I think, at that point. That was it.
We said, you know, we're not big enough to get you on the movie as a director, but, you know, we'll do our best.
The thing about Steve, he, like I say, had done a student film, but he'd also done a lot of assistant editing, and he'd cut a lot of movie trailers. So in terms of the post-production, I think in his head he knew pretty much the footage he would need to be able to cut it together.
Traditionally, editors weren't thought of at that time as the best candidates for directing. So if there hadn't been this sort of brief bidding war where Bob Shea really wanted the picture, I don't know if at another time in history he would have agreed to one or the other of them directing. So we went ahead with Steve. I think he was 26 years old at that moment in time.
I met Steve Herrick right before we started shooting, and he was a joy to work with. I mean, we had no time to do an entire feature, and everybody was working around the clock. It was really a labor of love.
I love Stephen Herrick. Stephen was fun. He was a fun director, and he knew the genre he was doing. He knew not to take it too seriously.
Stephen Herrick was wonderful. He was very open, obviously, to all my ideas because he let me use them all.
That's when the magic happens. You know, when you get the best stuff is when the director really knows what he wants, and he gives you the freedom to play around and bring your own stuff in too.
I can do it.
Absolutely not.
Dad, you can't even walk.
Son, assuming I said okay, how would you do it?
Hit the yard, grab my bike, and head for the highway.
I think we're pretty proud of our cast.
Everything seemed to fit, you know, they all had the characters down. That's all that mattered to me.
They all embraced the script and played in the style we were doing the movie. You know, the scares have to be scares.
You know, in terms of like playing the kids, you know, the daughter and the son, I think it was like pretty much open casting. I don't even know, honestly, where Scott Grimes came from, but, you know, once we found him, it was like, boy, this kid he was just great. He was great.
Scott Grimes had done very little, but he was great in auditions.
Scott, I remember, was young.
My memory's 12 or 13.
But so mature.
There was no child star about him. There was no privilege about him. He loved acting in the show.
What the hell are those things?
They're from outer space, like Charlie says. Bradley.
He's so talented in so many different ways, but even at that very young age, it was like working with another really creative adult.
He looks pretty sick, Mom.
I'm okay, sport.
He's fine.
He doesn't look fine to me.
D. Wallace Stone loved the project from the beginning.
I really thought it was cute. I thought it was cute and funny and my kind of role.
Where's Brad? Still in the house.
Helen, get in the car, get in the car.
This was the first movie where she actually was credited as D. Wallace Stone, not D. Wallace. And Bob Shea didn't want that because he thought, well, you know, D. Wallace from E.T., we want D. Wallace. You know, he eventually lost that argument. The agent won out, obviously, and not that it would matter. Everybody knows who she is, you know.
And she really gives it her all in this movie. I mean, she's so great in this movie. She's acting as if she's in a better movie than it is, you know?
I think my biggest contribution was the relationship with the kids and the family unit, and some of my ideas about not playing down to the kids, making them more equals in this quest of surviving the critters.
D. Wallace Stone was a great center to their family.
The whole family had to work together, and they had to be smart, and they had to trust each other in order to get out of this mess. And that's one of the things I really liked about it.
Oh, yes, you can, darling.
I know there were a lot of different guys up for the father.
Billy Greenbush, who I'd seen in movie after movie after movie. I mean, you know, he was like a constant in all these westerns that I grew up watching. I was so starstruck, you know, by him.
Billy Greenbush, he comes off so staunch and dry, but he's really funny. He brought sometimes some much needed levity into the set, because when I get into a role, sometimes I can really go out there a little way. So he had a good way of bringing me back to put my feet on the ground.
A lot of the things in the movie are almost takeoffs on stuff we've seen a million times. I mean, how many times have you seen the scene where the power gets cut in the house? I mean, we knew we weren't doing it for the first time, you know. And whether or not Billy Greenbush knew we were doing it for the first time or not, I don't know, but he sure did act like it was the first time he'd ever been in a movie. And I just thought that was hysterical. Picks up the phone and he listens.